Good afternoon, or good evening, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome back. Welcome to the Light 'em Up Lounge. I'm in Sarasota here at Corona Cigar at the upstairs VIP lounge. Um, Freezing my ass off, like so many people in the US at the moment. This is not really what Florida is supposed to be like. I know Fred is sweating over there with his heated jacket and all the other appliances that he just shopped last minute in order to get his uh, patio heated up for today's session, which we really appreciate. Um, but all jokes aside, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It's a privilege to have you. And we have two special guests joining us today here in sunny Florida, almost sitting next to me, but this is sort of the second best thing. Fred and Thor from Cigar Press on the other side of the country, all the way out west, but equally as cold. Gentlemen, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have you both here with us today. Thanks for joining. Thor, I know for you it's a premiere. Fred had the dubious pleasure of being on here before, so I'm surprised, shocked, and delighted that he decided to jump on again. But a very warm welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining us at the Light 'em Up Lounge.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
man.
Yeah, it's great.
So, Thor, let me start with you, because it's the premiere, and also you were the gentleman who actually started and launched and founded Cigar Press many, many moons ago. Tell us a little bit about how Cigar Press came to life, and then as we progress, we'll talk about where it stands today, how Fred got into the whole picture. But let's take us back with you on memory lane, and talk a little bit about those early days of Cigar Press, please.
Sure. Well, I started Cigar Press in 2007. I had worked in the cigar industry as a freelance writer for a few years before that, and I had lost all my work. And meanwhile, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was actually working part-time for Pete Johnson at Tatuaje. I was interviewing at different cigar shops. I'm like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. He's like, well, why don't you put your knowledge and skills to use and start a little rag distributor around here in LA? And so the wheels started turning. He said he would buy an ad, and basically that's how it started. We had our first issue. We did an interview with Carlito and interview with Pete, and the rest was history. And now it's been about 18 years since.
Unbelievable. What was the media landscape like back in those days when you initially started? Also, because you mentioned you were a freelance writer before that.
Mhm.
Um, how did you feel about what was going on? What was the sentiment, and what did the media landscape in particular look like?
Well, there really wasn't any social media at the time, at least as in the presence that it has today. Um, and the only kind of magazines at that time, there was Cigar Journal, obviously Cigar Aficionado. Um, and so the magazines at that point all seemed to be geared towards the luxury end, luxury items. So I thought it might be interesting to kind of put our own take on it, have something that was a little more accessible to everybody, and just something that more people could relate to. Is focusing more on cigars as opposed to expensive cars and watches, things like that. So there was a lot of room at that point for something that was different. But there weren't as many websites, definitely not as many blogs and sites as there are today. So it was an interesting time to start. We kind of just picked up on the tail end, I think, of print media, and then after that, social media kind of really kicked off and kind of changed the landscape.
Looking back, and when you think about all these years and how the industry evolved ever since you started, how the media landscape evolved ever since you started, where do you feel that we're at here in 2025 in terms of the industry progression? And a lot of people would argue, it's probably a golden era to enjoy cigars. The shop, the lounge down here, it's a perfect testament to the plethora of amazing cigars that are out there on the market. Um, how do you think the whole thing evolved, and where do you feel that we're at right here today with the industry?
Well, I think it's a great time. I mean, there's so much information out right now, especially for people that are just getting into cigars. I mean, I remember when I got into cigars, you had to go to the bookstore, try to find any kind of hard copy book or cigar aficionado at the time, and and physically get your hands on on a magazine or something to learn. So now it's nice because there's just so much out there for people to that want to get into this hobby. You know, I mean, you can get lost in the information. So that's fantastic for people. I mean, there's always something to learn. And now it's just right there at their fingertips. And also too, the cigars. There's just so many great cigars. Well, I got involved in the 90s, and so it was really far and few between. It was a hard time to learn about a good cigar just because of the boom and all the products out, which is probably why I fell in love with Fuente at first because they're so consistent. And now there's so many different boutique brands and different expressions of cigars out there. So there's really a lot to choose from. So, um, there's not a better time to be a cigar smoker, that's for sure. Outside of the
Fred,
laws, legislation.
that's a fair point. Yeah. Fred, what was 2008 like for you? I mean, it feels like a different world and certainly a different era. Um,
It
Time
was,
flies, that's
yeah,
for sure. But
yeah. It was,
when was the
it
first time
was.
that you met Thor, by the way?
Oh God, I don't know. Probably back around. I'm gonna guess probably somewhere around 2012, 2013. I think probably at the convention or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I had always liked the magazine. He was exactly kind of like the audience I think that he was creating for back then when it started. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't like the other magazines. I got it, but it was the only source. You look at Cigar Aficionado and like it's the only source, and a lot of luxury items like Thor said and stuff in there. What was refreshing about Cigar Press at the time was it was kind of like every man's type thing. Initially when it came out for years until very recently, it didn't do ratings. It just talked about the cigars and took away the focus from that. The interviews were from a different angle. It wasn't. It was. They were more in depth into the personal lives of them, not just the cigars. And I think if you flash forward to now, like Thor said, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of in depth. And what was unique about Cigar Press then, and I think it also, the goal is to maintain that, is to get more information that's not just stuff you can look up. Like, I mean, I'm smoking a Crown Heads Belgian Blue. It's just what I grabbed out of the thing. Great cigar. I can look up online and I can see what that is right away. I can see Sumatra, I can see Ecuadorian, I can see the Dominican. So what I want to know is I want to know the story behind it. I want to know what was John's idea when created and stuff like that. So that kind of in-depth stuff thing's fun. We're still going to do. We're also, what I'm trying to focus on a little bit also is, let's, not luxury goods, but let's work in just what every day. So part of it is for me a goal of not just a magazine that cigar smokers want to get cigar information, but the kind of stuff that the information they want, just that lifestyle, not hey, I'm looking to buy a jet lifestyle, or I've got box seats next to Michael Jordan at the Super Bowl, whatever it is. I mean, just real stuff.
Very good point. So, Thor, just sort of let's wrap up the historical component as to how you got to where we are today. You partnering up with Fred, which is a relatively new endeavor. You've, I believe, the press release came out, I want to say towards the end of last year. Um, so, how do you feel about that new exciting era and the new journey ahead for Cigar Press together with Fred?
Well, it's definitely exciting for me. I mean, I have done the magazine by myself, since it started. So to have somebody on board kind of keeps that fire going. You have a gym partner to show up and work harder for. So I'm excited. He's obviously been in the industry a long time. He's got a lot of knowledge, but not just on the cigar end, on marketing, social media. So it's definitely going to be a great partnership. And we share that love of the leaf, I think, just as equally, and we've never stopped.
You
Just
said
out of
nothing about a gym.
curiosity,
There was nothing about a gym I heard about up front showing up for.
or did you ever consider Cigar Press a business, or when you launched it, did you have a clear vision of, this is how I want to do this, this is going to provide for my family and be, my entrepreneurial journey, ideally for the rest of my life?
Well, it kind of led to that at first. I mean, I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I was single by myself, and I still had a job working with Pete as I started it. And so as it just built, I eventually moved to Miami to kind of pursue it more as a full-time business. So I was just thankful that it was able to grow and lead to that and provide for my family now.
Where do you see some fundamental changes, or how do you think Cigar Press is gonna be different from what it used to be with the Fred on board now? Um, did you sort of revamp the whole thing, or you put a plan together, the two of you, as to where you want to go with it and how it's going to be different? Or would you say it's mostly going to be the same brand identity? It's going to be the same idea and vision, just with a lot more firepower?
Yeah, I think the vision's not going to change of, who we kind of are and represent. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a good, with Fred anyway being on there, it's going to have a lot more focus online and social media presence. Before, I mean, we just focused on print. And so the back end, the online presence was kind of lacking. And so now our focus is definitely going to be more online. Our website, we totally revamped that, redesigned that right after he came on board. So we're still planning on doing a print issue this year. So we don't want to get rid of that. But as far as any sort of changes, our image, probably everything will stay the same, except now you'll see us a lot more online.
That's good news. Fred, what made you literally sort of buy into the idea of Cigar Press and make that transition in your career? The last time we spoke, you were sort of on the rear end of your work with Illusione,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and now this is a whole new direction. How come?
So the gap between Nomad and Illusione, I was just, back to being a cigar fan, which I always have been, and was perfectly fine with that. And then I wanted to do something that was kind of give back a little bit, and that led me to do what was the Final Puff videos, which were in-depth interviews with Carlito and stuff, and was real happy the way they turned out. They were real, they exposed them in a different light, and they were really in depth. So that was kind of in the back of my mind, and I was, then at the same time as when Dion asked me to come do some stuff for him to manage a transition on some stuff, and that was done. Actually, it went longer than it was originally going to go in some ways. So that was winding down, and that was literally at PCA last year. That's when it was supposed to be done. I ended up doing some stuff a little bit longer, but Thor was just there, and we were just talking, and I can't even remember who said what. But I just said, I'd be interested in talking to you about, what's going on with Cigar Press and like that, because it just hit me like I had no idea until that moment Thor was talking about something about Cigar Press. And so then we met the next, I don't know, I think every morning, the next several days or whatever, for several hours early in the morning, sitting in a really, the Vegas bar at 6 a.m. is fairly sad because it's the people coming from the night before. But the more I thought about it, the more I was excited, because I thought in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, a lot of people are like, well, start something, start not a magazine, but start like, a social media, or do more interviews or something like that. I thought I could, and it's a big build, but then I kind of saw the window of like, wow, it'd be really not easier per se, but if I could get in with a legacy brand that was Cigar Press and kind of just go, okay, so we had a lot of talks, because look, Thor's did it all himself. And that's not just to say, to print a magazine and come up with that stuff, but just also to build a brand and image. So that was something I didn't want to jeopardize. So the question was my style going to be a fit with Thor? Because we're very different in a lot of ways. Did it fit in with Cigar Press's vision? And I think what Thor said earlier about the vision, or the avatar, if you will, of what Cigar Press is, doesn't change. I think what changed, and what the necessity to change now is print's very expensive. It's also a lead time that is, people want information quicker, and they want it, they want to know what the releases are. And one of the ways that we're focusing on what we're publishing, say on the website or in the magazine, I don't want to chase the daily barrage of who's releasing what. I think it's a lot of noise, and there are geeks that love that, and there are a couple great websites that are going to publish every single press release that comes out there and every single cigar and new size and stuff like that. That's not us. I don't want to do that. Thor doesn't want to do that. We will post some of those meaningful. Crown Heads talked about their LE for 2025. We posted that today, so we'll do some of that. But it just kind of all came together at one moment to very long-windedly answer your question. So
that's
it was an
perfect.
and I didn't want to do it alone. I'm just like, it's a lot of work, whether you're talking about social media, the magazine, the website, these type of things and stuff like that. It's a lot of work to do yourself. So I just talked to Thor about, look, would you be interested in having a partner in it? And I think it worked out well. It works out well for both of us, particularly going forward. I think that you've got to be able to do things that, stay ahead of the curve and do things that other people aren't doing, and have your own unique spin on it. And have fun.
Fred,
Have fun. It's just rolled up tobacco. That's all we're talking about here. So have a good time with
it. Very true. The other part is, I think, having two different personalities, and you mentioned that in some instances or in certain ways, you're fundamentally different. That brings an added layer of depth and complexity to the publication as well, because I would argue that, especially for something that's passion driven and has a lot of ego involved on the manufacturer side and the grower side, and then you have a lot of pride and enthusiasm and passion on the consumer side, people will always cling on to a certain style of writing, a certain palette. You're more likely to read somebody's reviews if you think that your palette is somewhat aligned with theirs, so it gives you a certain reference. And having two different personalities and perspectives under one overarching roof, I think adds to the overall depth of the publication.
Yeah, I mean, Thor's definitely more the look, he's the guy with the literary degree. I'm like gonna way overuse ellipses in my articles. I'm gonna way overuse parentheses. I'm sure he looks at my stuff and just absolutely cringes at it, because it's like, it is not. I write the way I talk in a lot of ways, and I'll have thought bubbles and sides and stuff like that. And Thor's stuff is like quality, in depth, and so there are two different views. Right now, Thor is more doing the reviews than I want to do the reviews. And this is me jumping over to the media side. I mean, he's been on that side of the fence. So right now, it would feel very weird for me to give a rating to somebody I know in the industry that I've known. It feels weird. So that gives us a nice division and a nice safety net for both of us on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in reviewing and rating the cigars, it's always hard. We try to be objective as possible because, like you said, everyone has a different spin, different palates. It's what they're familiar with and what they like. So I'm not going to say one cigar is good, one cigar is bad, just because I happen to like cocoa traits, or, I don't like spiciness, so that one's bad. And so that was kind of the idea of not doing ratings before. We just try to do it objectively. It was well built, constructed, burned well, and so now we've added the rating, so it's a little different for me. Like you said, because I know everybody in the industry for so long, I feel bad if you give a bad rating. But, there's so many good cigars to focus on the bad stuff. And so we're just trying to shed light on the positive.
Yeah. Fred mentioned the ever abundance of press releases in regards to what's coming out. Here's a new cigar, and it becomes repetitive very quickly and very easily. And then you have that second layer that you both mentioned, which is the review side of things, where I would argue for most of the cigar media, those are the two major pillars of what makes up their daily content. The question then becomes, what's underneath that or on top of it or besides, like, how can we create the media landscape where we can still grab people's attention for long format content and stuff that's not either a press release or just a cigar review, where I think a lot of the golden nuggets for cigar media truly are. But then, of course, we have to take into consideration the sheer reality of how people consume information and content nowadays. How do you both think about that?
Thor, you want to go first?
I was going to let you go first. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think, and look, this is everybody's different, and there's a percentage of people that want the daily information and stuff like that. I don't believe personally that's the bulk of the cigar world. I don't believe the bulk of the cigar world cares that Skippy got a promotion, and now instead of regional, he's semi, 2 regions and stuff like that. I don't think generally people care on a day-to-day basis that someone has, 5 sizes in their line and they're adding a sixth one. Having been on that side of the fence as a manufacturer, I know exactly what that process is. I would put out 3 sizes. I would roll 4 out of the gate. I would hold back that 4th one. So 6 months later, I had the ability to put out a press release that said, hey, now available another size, which becomes a backfill self-fulfilling prophecy because you're thinking, well, Fred wouldn't make another size unless the cigar is selling really well. So I guess I better go check out that cigar. So look, it's a game. I mean, sometimes there is legitimately somebody that has that like, they're adding another size and stuff like that. And I'm not, look, you add sizes. I mean, there are reasons to add sizes of those blends because you don't want to go in deep with 5 different sizes or whatever out of the gate. I just think that I would rather focus on quality, not quantity. And I know that is against what most of online marketing / social media is. That's not to say we're slowly vamping up the social media. And I think that I want to concentrate on engagement as much as I want to concentrate on content. And I think that if I'm sending out probably one right now, my goal is once a week. Maybe it'll be once a week, and then there's some sort of breaking news that's worth emailing. Is emailing out people, not where you have to go to the website every day, not where you have to go there. I send you an email that has a nice synopsis of, hey, here's 3 things to check out this week, that are relevant. And I think that's the bulk of the cigar smokers. They just want to kind of be in tune, but they don't want to be inundated with the information.
Right. And I think too, people are going to follow people that they like, or even people that have experience, which we both have, and as far as our palates go. So the cigar information. So it's just things that we like, that we relate to other cigar enthusiasts, and so we just try to provide our day-to-day cigar life for people and hope that they appreciate that and want to follow it.
Mm-hmm.
I think our top 20 list, by the way, I think that came out this year, we got a lot of good feedback on. I'm not saying the other lists are bad. There's a lot of great lists out there, but it was a real list. It's not driven by other things. It's just real cigar smokers that are like, look, these are what we think were really good ones to pay attention to. And that's always a conflict in our industry.
Excellent points. Now, as sort of a counterposition to that, or if you want to challenge, then obviously print is, in most people's perception, having a very hard time, and seems slightly antiquated or out of time. On the other hand, people would also argue long format content is not really what most people are in for, where now it's all, snippets and reels and short TikToks. How do you feel that we can counter that, or how do you think we can still put out valuable information that goes a little deeper and offers a more in-depth perspective on important matters, properly researched, not necessarily long format content, but just something that has value from a journalistic perspective, but also captures the audience where they are?
Well, I think, the articles and content, they need to have some sort of personality and a voice, to keep it entertaining, especially for me. I was talking to Fred about this. I like his articles because they're kind of funny and they get to the point and shorter. And, I was working on an article and it was like a story style because I went to school for fiction writing. And I'm like, man, I just don't know if people are into it so much more anymore. That kind of content's long, a lot to read. But I think as long as you can keep that entertaining, people will be engaged with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing is, though, I mean, we in social media or in these type calls, if you took a snapshot and thought this was the cigar industry, it is a small percentage of people that are literally going on these shows, going on blogs. This is not a multi-millions of dollar industry If you take a screenshot just of social media or just of shows or just of podcasts or just of online media, your expectation would be that 9 out of 10 cigars sell are Nicaraguan, that nobody buys, a Macanudo, that nobody is interested in long form interviews. And that's not the reality of the industry. We are probably less than 10% of all cigar smokers. So, and in saying that, to dovetail that this is why it's important for us not to lose the magazine in print form, however number of times it needs to come out, because there's a ton of guys that aren't getting online and looking and searching for, us or Half Wheel or Coop or any of the ones out there that have great content. So this is a way to reach them in another way, in a media that they are comfortable with, that they are in a different spot. There's one thing to just kind of, I'm stuck on a bus and I'm scanning through, or I'm back of an Uber just scanning through. And there's another thing, I'm like, I want to sit down. I want to read a magazine. I want to have a cigar. I want to read this in-depth article about so-and-so. So I think it's covering both those.
Yeah, we want to have that reach for sure that can hit all those different aspects, and there is something to be said about sitting down in a lounge and picking up a magazine. It takes more time. It's not something so quick. You got to thumb through the pages, and it's just nice to be able to pick something up.
The ads are prettier. The ads are way prettier in a magazine.
A lot more room for creative layout. So
yeah,
fun to look at.
Excellent point. Just last week with SIG, we were also talking about the current state of journalism, or the way that information is being spread out nowadays. And I think one of the main issues is that everything is opinion based nowadays, right? I mean, journalism in the truest sense of the word has become a rare treat, and primarily because of social media and everybody having a voice nowadays, opinions start to creep into the picture very, very easily, and we lose a little bit of that understanding and appreciation for what true journalism used to be. On top of that, I would argue that because of our industry being so small and such a tightly knit community, it's inevitable that you have all these relationships between the various different stakeholders of the industries, whether that's the manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers, the media side, and the end consumer. It becomes a bit of a Gordian knot that's very difficult to open up again. Do you feel that this is an inherent or fundamental challenge that cigar media has? Or would you argue that it's just a natural evolution of information flow, how people consume content, and how journalism works these days?
Brad, I'll let you go for that one.
Reinhard always has the best questions out of any interviewer. I told Doug before. It's a great question. I think the nice thing about, the opinion side, which I think does run more rampant in a lot of things than traditional journalism. And the one thing, as I look at cigars the same way, say 30 years ago, I'd look at somebody reviewing a movie. Typically, that you would find a reviewer that you liked their style of reviews, you liked what their movies they liked, and you would follow that person into whatever rabbit's hole of movies they would talk about. Then there's also the guy that, like, I was in film school, that would literally break down every camera angle and say, well, he's a foot higher than this guy because this is what it's showing and stuff like that. And I think largely our industry is more opinion based, and that's okay as long as you can still fill it with the facts and everybody knows whether you're stating opinion or whether you're stating fact. One advantage I think we have in our industry, and this is a credit to the manufacturers, we have unprecedented access. For the most part, we're not covering, from a journalism standpoint, if you're trying to cover what's going on in Washington or some sort of battle going on across in another country you can't get in or you can barely get in, we can call up any of the manufacturers. We can call up and get clarity. We have direct access. So now a lot of what we're sharing might be thought of as opinion, but we get to talk to them. And I think that's a big advantage we have in this industry, is the transparency we have. Thor and I just went down to Dominican Republic about 3 months ago, and La Aurora just opened up their factory, and we went through everything there, and it was just, it's very hands-on. Probably the most hands-on event I've ever been in a factory, and we've certainly done a lot of them. So I think it's that tightrope, and there is a place, but also, I mean, it's a finite universe. So what facts are we talking about? We're talking about getting rid of myths. We're talking about getting rid of misconceptions about what tobacco is and what things are. But at the end of the day, what can be reported on the facts of rolling a cigar largely have been reported.
Right. And there's only one origin story for everybody, so you have to kind of put your own spin on it in order to keep it interesting. You could read the same interview by 50 different guys on how somebody started. So you kind of got to get creative and put your own opinions in it.
Or do you think that from the early days of Cigar Press to where we're at today, the flow of information and the transparency from the manufacturers towards the media has changed fundamentally? Because that's another thing that we oftentimes discuss, and I struggle with a little bit is the whole transparency aspect, and the flow of information from the manufacturers all the way to the end consumer. And I believe we're still far away from industries like the wine industry or the spirits industry, where there's just so much more information out there, or the creative process, the creation, the blending, and all the technical aspects are just more. I don't know if relatable is the right word, but more accessible to the end consumer. Because we could still argue, of course, every end consumer who's really into it can go on a factory tour with Perdomo, go and experience Puro Sabor, Pro Cigar, or any of the other festivals and take a deep dive. But again, to Fred's point from earlier, that's that very thin layer of cream floating atop of the majority of cigar consumers and what truly makes the bulk of the industry.
Right. No, I mean, it's definitely changed. Before, I feel like all the consumers at least relied on what the magazines put out there and what they showed them. And now consumers have direct access with the manufacturers, with the faces of these companies directly. So any kind of questions they have, and they're much more accessible, I feel like, than a lot of the other industries. And so questions get answered, any kind of things these people might want to know about a certain product. I mean, it's right there and they can ask the people behind it.
And look at the evolution of the manufacturer themselves. I mean, even in the last, say, 6-7 years, guys that would never jump onto a call like this. I mean, big names of people that just, it's social media. It's just, yeah, I don't want to do that. How many of them now will jump on a call with a even a smaller show and be a guest on a smaller show? Sometimes I'm surprised. I'll see somebody, on YouTube starting out, and so-and-so is going to be on their show. And I'm like, wow, this person would never have done that years ago. So I think the manufacturers started playing a lot more and realizing that they need to be part of the conversation. They need to manage the perception with the consumer and not necessarily rely on somebody saying what they are. They need to be accessible. People want to know, who made their cigar. And to your point earlier in the show, there, and we may be at the pinnacle of it, and I believe we might be. There's never been a better time to be a cigar smoker, because there's so many great cigars available. You walk in any shop right now, where you are right now, there's not a bad cigar in there. There may be a cigar better for your palate than another one, but there's not a bad cigar in there. We've never had a better time to be a cigar smoker. So what needs to change is the engagement. And what you're doing is instead people, you go back 20 years ago, they were brand loyal, blend loyal, and size loyal. They were like, I am buying this box, this size, this brand, and that's what they're walking out of the shop with. Now, cigar smokers mostly are, not all of them, obviously, there's a big bulk that I'm not talking about, but they're like wine drinkers. What am I in the mood for? What did I have for dinner? Is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Do I have time for a long cigar, a small cigar? Do I want a fuller body? Do I want a mild? The palates have evolved so much more. So the storyline of how we talk about them has changed in that process as well.
What's interesting, and I couldn't agree more with what you said, Fred, but I guess for a consumer to make an educated decision on which cigar they would like to smoke in a particular moment, given the circumstances, I guess you could go down the emotional route of, you relate to the story of the family behind a particular brand, the way the cigar was conceived, how it all came to life, and then you have the more technical aspect of the tobaccos that are in there, how that's going to register on your palate, and the aroma and taste profile. So, uh, who do you think is the ultimate gatekeeper, and the major introductory point for the end consumer to steer them in the right direction? Because probably what you do on the media side relates more to the emotional aspect, where you get to share some of the behind the scenes, the story of the family, the legacy component, and the retailer is probably the one who talks more about the aroma and the taste profile, and whether this particular cigar or any of the other cigars down there, for example, would fit the occasion and the palate of the consumer that's in front of you. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that your local tobacconist, good retail shopkeeper is the one that's going to steer you in the right direction, especially if someone's unsure of what they want. I mean, they'll ask the right questions and kind of lead you in the right direction. And even as far as your what flavor profiles you like, strength, your experience level, and they should be able to pinpoint it and give you a good experience.
I think what Thor said, and I also think what we're doing is we're backfilling a decision they've already made. We see,
That's an interesting
like,
point.
this is to not be pessimistic. So I am not talking to the bulk of the audience that is jumping on these shows and really educating themselves and stuff like that. I'm talking about the bulk of cigar smokers. The bulk of cigar smokers respond to 70% marketing in this business. Did it resonate with me? Does the story or the vibe or the look of the manufacturer resonate with me? I'm going to smoke their cigars. We have seen fabulous cigars not make it on the shelf for whatever reason. The box doesn't look right, the band doesn't look right, they met the manufacturer and he's a complete ass, whatever it may be. And then we've also seen cigars that, in my opinion, are less par. We know that from a factual standpoint of just what tobacco's in it and what it is, and have them sell like hotcakes. Now, smoke what you want. I don't judge anybody. If I liked $1 cigar, I would wish I liked $1 cigar because I would like to pay $1 for a cigar. But at the end of the day, you're not buying into just a cigar because there's so many good cigars right now. You're buying into the tribe. You're buying into when someone asks you in a lounge, what are you smoking? I'm like, oh, I'm smoking a Crown Heads, or I'm smoking an LFD. Or that guy that has to have a higher end cigar that it may be a better cigar, but the reason he's smoking it is so everybody around him sees that flex and he makes sure he holds the cigar so the band's showing for everybody to see it. Or it's the guy that says, I only smoke Cubans because they're the best. Look, Cubans are great cigars when you get a good one. I'm not saying they're not, but it is only one type of tobacco from one island. I like Cubans, but I don't like the process as far as how to go through to get to a good one. I have a good one. I'm like, this is an outstanding cigar, but it's just one type of cigar. And I think that's the reality of it. So when I say we're backfilling a story, we're backfilling somebody into a brand they've already bought into. And then that's where we kind of come in as media. If someone's truly seeking out education in it, which that's the people that show up to shows like this and people that read more online or read more of the magazines. Now we're subtly backfilling the story to where what they like, and we're recommending other cigars for them to try. And that's where the retailer comes in. I've been saying for years to not necessarily pay attention to the brand, also pay attention to the factory. Because if you did some sort of cool diagram that I don't have the ability to make, you would start seeing the signatures of different factories. I've been in enough factories and smoked enough cigars that I can smoke a cigar and go, I think this is from this factory. I can smoke another cigar. I think it's from that factory, because there's certain signatures that go along with the tobacco they're using, the aging processes they're using. And that's what you glue onto, I think. And that's where we come in, is to help guide somebody. A retailer's job is to turn the person on to their next favorite cigar. But you could stop making cigars today. And Clint Aaron said this years ago. It's like, not what's new to you. And I think as our industry, we finally got a little bit away from that. What's new. I'm like, dude, I mean, I saw Saka at an event that someone, he's releasing a cigar, and someone years ago was saying, well, what's your next cigar? And he's like, I just released this one. And you're worrying about what's new. And so we've gotten off that a little bit. So it's a subtle line of educating the people that really step forward and identify themselves as wanting to learn more, and learn more about what their palates and which tobaccos they like and don't like. And that's where the retailer, we can educate, on a dive on a show or on an article, but that's really where the retailer magic happens. The retailer says, oh, you like this cigar? You might want to try this one. This has very similar tobaccos, but it's a little bit stronger, a little bit milder, whatever it may be. And I think that's what makes this industry great. At the end of the day, though, it's like trying ice cream. I can't walk in and if I run an ice cream store and you say, well, I don't know what ice cream, I'm like, you have to have chocolate. That's the best. Well, that's the best to me, but that may not be the best to you.
Right. And that's why we didn't do ratings originally in the magazine. We didn't want people to pay attention to the rating and smoke a cigar and be like, well, why is this good? We want them to pay attention to how it sounds to them. And if, that sounds good, then they try it, as opposed to concentrating on the number and figuring out, well, okay, why is this a 95 rated cigar? I am not at that point yet where I can taste that rating. I don't like it, but, so that way they might find something they actually like, as opposed to just smoking it for a number.
And what's challenging with that is there is no set standard in the cigar industry, and in brackets one could probably put yet, because the question would be, does that even exist, or is it possible to come to such a conclusion as to here's an industry widely accepted standard of objective criteria based upon which you could rate a cigar or judge a cigar? And just a couple of days ago, Half Wheel's consensus came out, and it wasn't so much the consensus itself that piqued my interest, but it was Charlie's analysis that he wrote underneath, where he also clearly stated that this is just a condensed version of various different subjective opinions that are out there, and it might help you in your process of trying to figure out what sits well with my palate. And I oftentimes wonder if we need to try and establish more of a widely accepted catalog of standard criteria based on which cigar are being reviewed and judged. Because still to this day, and as much as I love all the other cigar media that are out there, when you look at 4 or 5 different reviews of the same cigar, you will end up with a clusterfuck of different aroma and flavor notes, and you'll have a hard time to actually figure out what's the essence and what's the nucleus of the cigar that's being described here.
Right. I don't have the super palate. I don't have I taste boysenberries from the south part of the hill. And somehow we've evolved into these. Well, I can't just tell you that I'm tasting drier, woodier, earthier. Now I have to have Skittles, and I've got to have chicken, and I've got to have all this other stuff to make it readable. I don't think you can standardize it, though, because we have different palates. We smoke them at different times. I think,
I totally agree. And that's why I think
everybody's going to be 88 to 94.
Criteria.
It's going to be 88 to 94. Now, we can evaluate construction. We obviously can all agree on what construction is. I think we can agree on appearance. But flavors are going to be, you're going to gravitate to who do you think has a similar palate that you do. I look at the ratings. Look, I think Half Wheel's consensus is great because having been on the other side of the fence, you can have some friends that are bloggers or have close relationships, and you can social media the heck out of it, and you can get your cigar up and on several lists. You can't buy or make friends your way into the top of a consensus necessarily. So I look at it like movie reviews. If I pull up and it's got a high Rotten Tomatoes, rating, then I'm like, I might want to look at that because it's got a pretty good cross section. But if I don't look at the ratings as much as if I get someone that I know in the industry. So if Thor calls me up and says, hey, you need to try this cigar, or you call me up and say you need to try this cigar, or even better, a manufacturer tells me to try a cigar that's not theirs, I'm going to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm. Totally different question. Both of you, if you were to start cigar media anew, and you start with a white sheet of paper, and you begin drafting your ideal cigar media platform, what would that look like for both of you individually?
Honestly, I don't think it would change much. I like where we're at now. Obviously, we have some growth on the online and social media aspect. That's a huge part of it, and it would be a big focus. And then possibly the print might be secondary to that, just to give another avenue, more distribution, puts more articles and cigars in different eyes. But I like, I don't think I would change that much, opposed to having more focus on an online presence in the beginning.
Does that also relate to the type of content that you would put on there?
Yeah, I mean, interviews, articles, gear, and we always did liquor and beer and things that are associated with the cigar lifestyle. Definitely online would be shorter content, because I used to do articles, 10, 15 pages long. And so if I was just doing online, I definitely wouldn't do that anymore. I'd maybe keep that towards print. So that might be the only change as far as the content, keep that long stuff and storytelling more to the print side of things, but keep it nice and concise online.
Brett, what would your ideal completely new cigar platform look like, or what are the types of the pillars that you would put in place to create your dream cigar media platform?
I agree with what Thor said, and I think that we're doing that in the rebuilding of what we're doing, and changing Cigar Press, or evolving Cigar Press, if you will. I think you just have to stay true to what your voice is and what you're doing, and the tribe finds you, and you grow your tribe that way. I think you can't, much like you can't blend a cigar for every palate, I don't think you can do media for every type of person that's going to follow you. There's different types of people that do different shows, and some of the shows I like, some of the shows aren't my style, but they have their audience. So I think you have to stay true to what your audience is. But I think it starts with you and what you want to write about and what you find interesting, and then other people will also find that interesting. And I don't think you waver from that. I don't think you go outside whatever your zone of comfort is. Sometimes you have to make modifications because the industry wants it, and you have to look and say, okay, is that a modification that we're willing to make? Thor had to go through that with ratings. I liked that Cigar Press did not do ratings. I liked that he says, look, this is what the cigar is. This is the characteristic of the cigar. Off that, if you like these cigars, you might want to try these cigars type thing. Unfortunately, ratings is something that everybody wants, both on the manufacturer side and on the consumer. They want that. I would like to reiterate what Thor said, though. I don't want anybody to just go, well, I'm only going to smoke it because it's got a 94, and that's a cigar I should try, versus the one that's got an 89. That doesn't mean the 89 is for you any worse of a cigar. It could be a better cigar for you. It could be more in your wheelhouse. And that's the hard part about evaluating and throwing a number. If it was me, which is why I'm glad Thor's doing that, I'd give everybody a 92 and just call it good. Or if it was a horrible cigar, I just wouldn't print it. That's just what I would do. I mean, and I remember one time I was at convention when I had Nomad, and I remember someone was late to an appointment, and they came up and they said, "Oh, I was over at so and so's booth, looking at their cigars," and the person that was working with me, the rep, is just like, "Oh, their cigars are trash," and I yelled at the cigar rep afterwards, because I'm just like, dude, that person has an audience. They have a following. They have cigar people like it. You never trash somebody else's cigar. It may not be your palate, but you don't trash. And so it's an odd tightrope. But to answer your question, I think you just have to, the more you are true to what you like, the more you're going to have people follow you. I did that with Nomad. Nomad was just follow my journey. This is my interpretation of what I want a San Andres cigar to have in it. This is my interpretation of what I want to have in a milder Connecticut, that I want to have a little Ligero in there to give it a little bit more flavor. That mild does not mean you don't have flavor. And you find an audience that way. And as long as you're true to what that is, then I think you find your audience, and you find a passionate following. Trying to take care of everybody won't work.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And I listened to a German podcast the other day that spoke about the media landscape in general. And I even said it earlier that with social media now giving a voice and consequently an audience to pretty much everybody who has a smartphone or a computer at their disposition, makes the whole media landscape more granular, and probably also starts to niche it down even further. Because if you're geeky about certain types of lighters, to stay in our industry, or if you're geeky about loafers, just as a subsegment of a particular type of men's shoes, for example, and you start a podcast or a blog or a social media profile just based on that, the chances of you finding an audience that's interested in that are very likely. And one could argue that losing a certain authority on the traditional media side, where a handful of media platforms or large corporations were controlling the way stories are being told, now you have a much wider and more diversified landscape of media, which I think is very, very interesting. And there's pros and cons with that in terms of how legit is a certain platform, how transparent, how tied in with their respective industry they are. But I would argue, in general, it creates a more base democratic approach, and makes it more diverse and interesting in that sense.
Yeah, I think we have to figure out. I mean, uh, what we perceive as media evolves. I don't get the influencer thing. I really don't. I mean, you're paying somebody to shoot photos with your cigar and stuff like that. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Is it a form of media? Yeah. But I would be remiss in discounting the effectiveness of some of it. I don't know if people look at an influencer that is paid to be in a picture with a cigar and goes, "Oh, I'm going to go buy that cigar because that person has a picture with it." But does it have an effect? Does it have followers? Does it have interaction? Absolutely. Just because I don't understand it doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, people didn't understand blogs when they started. People didn't understand podcasts when they started, and so they have an effect. They have an audience. That's that weird tightrope that we always have to figure out.
Oh yeah, and everybody has it seems like everybody has a blog. Oh, I've been smoking cigars for a month. I have all the knowledge I need. I'm going to start a blog. And so I think, experience is really important, at least for your audience, to take you seriously.
You both have your finger on the pulse of the cigar industry, and you've had for decades. What are some of the things that really piqued your interest, the storylines for 2025 and the year ahead in cigars? Fred, you mentioned that you feel like manufacturers are taking a step back from just the what's new, and trying to fill the pipeline with more and more limited releases that are, a great cigar experience once, but then that one bale of exceptional tobacco is gone and you have to move on to the next one. What are some of these larger industry trends that you're seeing and that you're curious about in 2025?
Well, I'll tell you my greatest concern that I've been talking about for quite some time now, is more on what's on the negative side and the pitfalls we have. I mean, in America, the FDA thing was problematic. It went away for now. What concerns me the most, more than LEs or more than cigars, stuff like that, is the trend of generational bans. If I'm on the other side and I'm thinking, okay, how do I don't want people to smoke, and which, look, it's not an illegal product. Just leave me alone. I just want to smoke. I want to enjoy a cigar in my lounge. We can argue medical benefits, back and forth all day long. We can, argue about that. But, when the FDA thing happened and everybody rallied around, and you talked about people in the lounges, and that affected them immediately, and they were on board signing petitions, stuff like that. Generational bans concern me because this is a situation where legislation passes in a state that says, okay, in the year 2035, anybody born after this day or whatever can't buy tobacco. And what concerns me about that, and why, is that people are not going to fight for future generations that don't exist or don't smoke yet. It concerns me that I'm not going to fight necessarily, and some people will, but I'm not going to, if you tell me tomorrow you can't buy cigars because this law is on the books, I'm going to sign whatever petition. I'm going to donate money, fight it, stop it. If you tell me that somebody is going to not be able to smoke in the year 2035 or 2000, whatever, I'm probably not as motivated. And that concerns me. So that's a threat that I think we have right now. I think that's a threat that we have to get on top of. And I've been saying it for a while, but obviously we've had other things to focus on as well. As far as the positive sides of the industry, I think that the this is an industry of entrepreneurs. You've been to Pro Cigar, Thor, you've been to Pro Cigar. I'm sure some other people have. I mean, you have people, they're competitors. The day before Pro Cigar starts and the day after Pro Cigar, they're competing against others to sell more cigars than the other person, but they come together. It's hard to bring this industry together in a group of entrepreneurs, in a group that are competing against each other, and have them all have the same voice. And I think that we're getting better at that. I think that's something that's happening over the last couple of years. I think it happened since the FDA. I think it's between PCA's efforts and CRA's efforts and things like that. I think that we're getting more all on the same page on that fight, and we're passing on that communication to consumers better. So I think that's going to be a trend that's going to continue.
Yeah, I also like to see less new brands per se by the manufacturers and more line extensions. Different sizes that are in brands and blends that are already out there, because you see a lot of these huge ring gauge cigars, and I'm not a big fan of that, so I'm not going to pick up that brand because it's a big ring gauge. So you release a Corona or a Lancero or something smaller, I'm going to probably give it a shot at that point. So that's one thing I liked seeing last year, and hope it continues throughout this year. It's just more line extensions.
Based on the readership or the viewership that you see with Cigar Press, do you feel that the cigar community is growing? And as a subcategory of that, do you see more younger people jumping onto the bandwagon and joining the whole culture and the community?
Yeah, I would think so. I think it's been pretty consistent. I mean, when I started the magazine, it was a whole new generation of boutique brands, and you had Drew Estate and their whole following just exploded, and guys like Dion and Pete, I mean, and they definitely ushered in this new generation. And I see online, it doesn't look like that's slowing down to me at all, which is great, because you got to keep it rolling.
Because part of the reason that I asked this particular question is, we were all wondering, coming out of the COVID years and that tremendous spike in importation numbers and cigars being enjoyed. Imports are still up, right? But most of the retailers that I talked to would say that last year was probably soft for them, or at the very best, stable. So there seems to be a slight disconnect between those importation numbers and what's reported on the media versus the sheer reality of what most retailers are experiencing with their consumers.
Well, I think it's definitely going to level off when everybody's at home, because of COVID, they can't leave the house. I mean, they're going to be sitting around smoking a lot more cigars. And so I think it's definitely going to level off. And as far as future numbers, I'm not too sure. So we'll just have to see where we go from here.
I mean, COVID was such a big spike for the cigar industry. The fact that if a retailer was same or slightly lower than that giant spike, at the end of the day, it's growth. At the end of the day, it introduced a lot of people to cigars that weren't smoking cigars. I think that it comes back to the other side of the laws and the things that are out there. What is the access? If you're in a state that doesn't have a lounge or can't have lounges, or you can't smoke anywhere, it's problematic. If I can't meet some of you at a local lounge and smoke cigars because there's no lounges, it inhibits our access to be able to share cigars or bring somebody with us. I remember being on a panel a long time ago, and a woman asked me, she says, well, what are you doing to get more female cigar smokers? And that's been a large growing area of female cigar smokers. She's like, well, what are you going to do with your products or packaging that's going to attract more cigar smokers? And my answer was, look, we don't even know what you want for Christmas. I sure as hell don't know what you want in a box of cigars. But, and two, it's kind of insulting. It's insulting if I put out a cigar specifically for women, because one, I'm not a woman. And I think, look, I said, if you want women cigar smokers to grow, you do the same thing guys do. The guys they have a friend that's not a cigar smoker. Go, hey, come on with me to the lounge. Let's go. Let's introduce you to a cigar. I think women had to do the same thing. It's like, bring one of your friends down the cigar. And I think that's what we have to do. And I think, look, the price of cigars, back to your question a little bit earlier, as far as going forward, the price of cigars is going to have to go up. I mean, everything's gone up. We've been largely shielded I mean, the manufacturers have really taken a lot of the hits as far as not passing on the price increases that they've had. I remember making cigars back in 2012 at a cost for tobacco versus what it costs now versus what it's increased in price in the last 5 years. And that has not been on the shelf. There has been incremental increases, obviously, but it hasn't been what it could be. Combine that with a bad growing year, and I think we're going to have, pricier stuff. But I say that when you go to, if you have the opportunity to go, or media or somebody shares that with you, and you see what it takes to roll a cigar, you see, excuse me, you grow tobacco, and you're not even able to use that tobacco through 3 to 4 years and just sit there making no money on it while it's sitting there. Yes, it increases in value, but it still takes a while to get to market. When you see what it takes to create a cigar, 100 hands of people have to go through from seed to store on it. You're not going to balk over a $10, $12 cigar at that point. I just don't see how you can. It may not be in your budget, and that's okay, but it's a craft. It is a craft, and and unfortunately, it's costing more to make it.
Yeah, and if you're going to rate and review cigars, if you've never tried it yourself, it's really hard to be like, oh, this is a crappy cigar, didn't burn well. You'll have a little more leniency when you actually get your hands on it and try to do it yourself, and you really get that appreciation for what goes into it on every level.
Amen to that. Do you plan on relaying some of that through Cigar Press by, for example, going to Pro Cigar or Pur Sabor and reporting on what's happening at the festivals? Obviously,
Sure.
The trade shows are a major part to be covered on the media side as well. But how do you intend on taking your readers and your viewers on that deep dive into what's actually behind manufacturing these and give them that extra layer of appreciation for the product?
Well, I think definitely, like we were talking about, exposing what goes into it, rolling the cigars, everything from the field to the final product, when it gets to the retail humidor, what goes into it, because that's where the appreciation is. I mean, just growing it and dealing with the mold and the weather, all the way to the sorting and aging the tobacco. I mean, it's just it takes years of time, and so if people understand that, I mean, you really have a greater appreciation for what you're smoking.
How do you think about the internationalization of Cigar Press as well? I would imagine that the majority of your audience is probably US based, but do you also specifically look abroad and try to think about what could be interesting for an international audience to just cast your net a little wider in that sense?
Well, I think internationally people are more excited about, well, are they considered New World cigars, which are the non-Cuban? Because, you go to Europe and the humidors are still filled with just Cuban cigars. And so I think it's just exciting for them to read and learn about cigars that aren't Cuban and to be able to have access to those.
Brett, how do you feel about that? And I mean, do you look into some of the stuff that the PCA is doing with the new trade show coming to Dubai? It seems that the organization was pretty keen on the internationalization aspect, which also ties in with the regulatory aspect that we all need to be united as a global cigar community and less scattered into different audiences on different continents and different countries or states.
I think we're all united by a common bond that is cigars. I think though, realistically, I'm me, and I did not grow up in Europe. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, but is my communication going to be the style or cadence or words chosen that someone might choose there? It may not be, and I think that gives opportunity to some people in Europe to become larger voices in there. Much like marketing a cigar is very different in the United States than it is in Europe. So I think there's certainly a percentage of crossover, but there's certainly opportunity for people that are in their own areas, in their own backyards, communicating them in a way, in a style. We are still a very much new world. We are still not, I'm wearing a Patagonia puffy and you look good. So there's certain aspects that are going to be different. But I think there is some crossover. I think the mistake would be for me to intentionally write or communicate trying to pick up an audience that I don't fully understand. So now it becomes me trying to manufacture persona or communications in my interpretation of what I think they want. And that would be a misstep. As I interact with them more, I understand, where the commonalities are, but I can't go outside who I am and how I communicate for the sole purpose of another audience. I think that would be a mistake to not only me, whoever's already following me.
Great point. Before we wrap things up, just a little peek into the crystal ball as to what's installed for Cigar Press, what you have on the agenda for the year ahead and for the years to follow. Obviously, you've made a big step partnering up now. Cigar Press certainly enters a new era or a new time in its lifespan. What are some of the things that you see on the horizon or that you're planning on in order to increase that? And obviously, you mentioned extending your online presence. There's going to be print issues, I believe, on a semi-regular basis, whether that's quarterly or monthly. But just in general, what are some of the things that you're excited about and that you're looking forward to that you would like to bring to the table with Cigar Press over the next couple of years?
Well, for me, it's definitely the reintroduction of print. I mean, that's where I started. That's kind of where my passion is and the layouts and things like that. So I'm really excited for that. And just having a partner to work with is really exciting for me. So I'm just curious to see where it's going to go and what we can do together as opposed to just me alone.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more the online, it's more the speed to market, it's more the, hey, more casual conversations, the same as what occurs in a lounge. For me, it's not necessarily the deep dive that Thor is capable of. Me, it's probably shorter format, odd things that come across my desk or people send that are just kind of fun to share information about. Things that we look at every day that are just kind of odd, or I mean, I did a stupid article on that glass that has the notch cut out with the cigar held into it that I'm just kind of like, I mean, it's great for Instagram photos, but I mean, I'm a grown ass man. I know how to hold a glass and a cigar at the same time in the same hand. So I don't need, like, if I tried to take a drink with that thing, it just doesn't work. So I'm having more fun with that kind of stuff and just more stuff we talk about in lounges. But again, I go back to, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking it's not just a cigar media that talks about cigars. It's what would a cigar type of tribe be interested in reading about? I want to, I'm a huge cook. I rebuilt the whole kitchen just for a gourmet kitchen. I'm big on the outdoor cooking. So I want to cover barbecuing because most of us all like having a steak or so I want to cover lifestyle things like that are things that we do every day while we're smoking cigars.
Yeah, and that everybody can do, not just the elite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick side question on that, Fred, because you were on the brand side for such a long thing. Do you think that's a missed opportunity for a lot of the manufacturers that they're all competing within the humidor, but there's so much more to the culture, there's so much more to the lifestyle, and so many other areas where manufacturers and brand owners are probably missing out on opportunities to communicate what's relevant to them on a daily basis. That's not just, to your point, dried leaves of tobacco rolled into a cylinder.
I think some of the brands have grasped that. I think some of them, I think Camacho's pairing with Traeger and going into Traeger events and bringing cigars, I think is big. There's not anybody that goes to Pro Cigar that does not talk about Lito's barbecue that he does at his part. I mean, that's amazing. So I think that they do understand some of that crossover, as much to which they have time. La Aurora has done a fabulous job on their rums and embracing, not just going out and go, I'm going to stamp my name on alcohol or stamp my name on coffee and stuff, the things that are obvious bolt-ons to. I don't think you do it just for the sake of, hey, I want to put my name on there. You do it with meaning. I think La Aurora did a fabulous job on their rums that way, that they did it right. I think that you're going to see more of that, but it can't be at the detriment of them. It can't be a distraction. It can't, I mean, if you're a small manufacturer, you do not have time to blend your cigars, concentrate on the quality of the blends, the consistency of the blends, and market the blends and do shows and do interviews and stuff like that. And then also jump into some sub thing where you get distracted because your time is finite. If you're a big enough company that has the ability to go, look, let's start looking at some sister areas to market to and bring in new cigar smokers, then yeah. And I think you've seen some of them start to do that.
Excellent point. Andy had a question for you guys, or a comment.
Both a comment and question for you. First of all, Fred, the cigar's aged well. It is absolutely awesome. I'm just loving it. And I've known you guys for a long time, and I want to tell you, I did subscribe to the new magazine, The Online.
Thank you.
I've been following the magazine, and Thor, you know this since the Pete Johnson days, since you first came out. And I've always been impressed with the way the magazine went. Now, you know, you were talking about La Aurora, so I do have a question about a brand for you. La Aurora is now releasing the Cien Años again. Okay, the 100th anniversary. I've smoked the 120. I thought the 120 was an excellent cigar. Very good. But I'm trying to figure out, have you smoked the new release, the new Cien Años, and how does it compare to the original?
I don't
think we smoked it. We were down there and it wasn't ready when we were down there yet. I'm super excited about that because I was at Pro Cigar before that cigar was released and they happened to give it out there. And I've said this publicly on shows. I think, you know, and actually I have an article coming out on brands that you may have forgot about. And La Aurora is probably one of the most underappreciated brands as far as quality, I think, out there, as far as big brands. When that cigar, I am optimistic about that. When I smoked that cigar and it wasn't even on my radar. I mean, obviously I knew who Laura was, and I was sitting with myself, Christian Hudson, who owns Just for Him Cigar Shop in Springfield, Missouri, and Frank was there also. And we all lit up that cigar and we were blown away about it. So I am super optimistic and super hopeful that that cigar is anything close to what it was. Is it going to be exact? No, because we have different memories of it. So this is the danger of having a cigar that was so long ago, thinking, you know, oh, I remember it being this. And it's like, you know, everybody has that story. It's like, oh, I remember the cigar being great and it's not the same anymore. Well, it can't be the same. You know, Hanky and I had a conversation a couple of years ago that he had the best analogy of it. He says, you know, and then I extended it and saying, you know, basically we screwed up as cigar makers. Winemakers don't have the expectation to have the same wine every single year. We embrace that winemakers have different grapes every year, that they are blending a different wine every single year, and they try to put their interpretation as close as they can, but we embrace it. We don't do that with cigars, and we should. We should realize that year over year, the tobacco is different. The conditions are different. If 4 years have gone by, then you know what? They're dealing with a lot of different stuff. They're trying to tweak it. And we need to embrace that and be okay with it. And look, just because you had a cigar 10 years ago sitting on a beach in Mexico with your, you know, soon to be bride, you have a different memory of that cigar than you do now sitting in a lounge, sitting next to some guy that's like talking your ear off that you hate. So, I mean, we have to measure that as we go through it. But to answer your question, I'm hopeful that cigar is there. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and when we were down in Dominican at La Aurora a few months ago, we were talking to Manuel Noah, and he's like, you know, we're not going to put out a cigar if it's not going to represent what that cigar should be. You know, we just don't have the tobaccos that we feel should go into that cigar or whatever. So, you know, I'm very hopeful, and I believe it's going to be a phenomenal cigar just because they're not going to put something out just to put out that brand. They're going to put it out because it represents what that brand should be.
And I respect that. I respect the guy that's willing to wait. You know, look, they would have loved to put one out 5 years ago because it was a hit. I respect the brand that is willing to shelf something because it's not exactly the way they want, just to chase the dollar.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%, and especially your situation smoking. In 2015, when we were in New Orleans, I sat with Enrique Cejas and his father, and he gave me some of the Matildas, and he said, well, what do you think? What do you think? I said, that's an unfair question. I said, I'm sitting here with you and your father's a legend. You know, I'll smoke one tomorrow, and then I'll give you an honest opinion of what I think of the cigar. But this is common. The other thing I wanted to mention was the launching of all the Zoom groups. that are out there. And one of the Zoom groups I'm involved with is a UK, the International Cigar Zoom Cigar Bar. And one thing I have noticed is that more and more, as you would say, New World cigars have been reaching out to Europe. I'm hearing more people say they love them more than they like a lot of the Cubans that are out there right now. I don't have to age them for 3, 4, 5 years, and the prices are better down the line. And I've seen, as you guys have, some really phenomenal cigars coming out, and one of the problems I had to overlook was for a long time, I used to look and say, oh, well, that band looks pretty, the box looks pretty, let's try the cigar. And people were telling me, oh, I've got to try this. Eric Espinosa, he's got the cigar called Comfortably Numb. And I kept looking at this thing, looked like somebody was on acid when they designed the band. And I finally broke down and tried them, and it was a really good cigar. So, a lot of people are listening on these Zooms to people's opinions. And I just find that it's really nice to see the Dominican, Nicaraguan, Honduran, expanding out into the European market and the world market. And, we'd love to see you maybe come on to one of our Zooms and just chat a little bit about it, because in my opinion, there were only 2 magazines for me to read. One was yours and the other was Cigar Journal, because they seem to be, I want to know what your opinion of the cigar was, the basic profile and construction of a cigar. It meant a lot. I haven't looked at your ratings yet, but that was one of the things that kept me coming to you, and the way that Cigar Journal does their ratings compared to some of the other magazines. So, one of the things that used to irritate me is I'd be sitting in a cigar shop and getting ready to buy a couple of cigars, and someone would come in with Cigar Aficionado and say, I want these top 10 cigars because Cigar Aficionado says they're the greatest. And I've smoked some of those cigars and was not impressed. But my palate changes constantly, as other smokers do. And I just appreciate the way that you all have done it for years. So if you haven't checked out Cigar Press, you definitely need to. It's been a great magazine since what, 2008?
7, so close.
7.
Is it 7? Yeah, because we started visiting at 8, and in 2009 we had that dinner, and I have to find the picture for you. I do have it. I will get it to you.
That was in New Orleans, I think, wasn't it?
We were at the Palace in New Orleans.
I will tell everybody there's a great exercise to try that Abe and I did an experiment for 2 years where we basically had manufacturers create cigars, and we sent them 5 cigars to the Zoom group. And this was during COVID, and everybody smoked them blind. There were no bands on there. We put numbered bands on there so we could talk about them afterwards. And I would get 2 5-packs from Abe and Alex, and I would smoke through the 5 the week before the show or whatever. And I remember a couple times, texting Alex, okay, what is number 3? This cigar is really, really good. And he would come back with a brand name like, wow, that blew me away, because that is a brand that I have not touched forever. So I would say, if you're going in a retail shop and you're buying whatever your cigars, ask the retailer to go pick out one cigar for you if they know your palate, and take off the band and take it home and smoke it and see what it is, to lose that conception. I remember San Lucia gave me advice a long time ago when I was selling Nomads. He says, look, don't bring in the box to a retailer. Don't take the bands off and say, hey, smoke this. So you're not judging it on the box. You're not judging it on the name. You're not judging on what the band looks like, whether you like the band or don't like. You're just judging the cigar. And I would challenge you to go in a retailer that knows you and knows your palate and says, hey, go pick me out something I don't normally buy. Take off the band, take all those identifiers. And I just want to sit here. I'm going to smoke that cigar and see what you think about it. And you may be surprised at some of the cigars and some of the brands that you get introduced to that you've long since forgot about that are great cigars.
Oh, that sounds fun.
And it may suck. I don't know.
I may try that, because you and Pete and a lot of other brands used cabinets. A lot of the Cubans used cabinets. And, it's not the most beautiful box in the world, but the cigars may be. So you can't
smoke
judge.
a box.
Yeah, you can't.
Oh, that's my favorite. You get that half wheel of 50 cigars, and you pull that out of the box, and you just plant your face in the end of that and just smell it. I mean, that's the best
presentation
for me. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys, and Reinhardt, I appreciate you bringing them on board. It's been a really good show. Very good.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Andy. Really appreciate it. One last question, and Fred, you just made me think about this, and I believe your point is on the money. Um, Consistency, performance over the years, and also accepting variations or fluctuations based on the raw materials that you're working with. And I agree that this is something that the cigar industry does not necessarily appreciate and talk about much. Do you think that's also the responsibility of cigar media? And when we circle back to the review aspect for a second, all that ever ends up being reviewed and that goes on these top 25 lists for mostly, I would argue, clickbait reasons, is new releases and new stuff. With one exception, and that's Cigar Aficionado, where you see certain legacy brands and blends being revisited year after year after year. Do you think that's something that cigar media should tap into a little more? Is to sporadically sprinkle in a review of a Don Carlos, an 858, an Old La Aurora blend, a Melanio, whatever it might be, just to revisit some of these cigars and write a review on it and say, this is the 2024 rendition of a blend that's been on the market for 20 plus years, but let's see how it does this year. And through that, create a bit more of an awareness of how blends evolve over time or present themselves differently year after year after year.
Good, though.
No, yeah, I think that's a great idea. We actually talked about that too, because we had decided to do the, new yearly releases. But then we were like, well, we actually spoke about that, saying, well, I hate to leave out these cigars that are just awesome. Like this #1 cigar might not be better than, another cigar from a previous year. And so I think it is important to definitely keep these brands, out there in front of people, and to revisit, because they're not usually any worse off than they were then. But the consistency issue, it is good to revisit just to see how they're pairing up to what they used to be, and to make sure that they're still up there.
And also, I think there's plenty of value in that, and it doesn't take away from the excitement about people reading about a cigar that was just recently released. But I'd be very interested in hearing different people's opinion about how a 2022 rendition of a Don Carlos, just to stick with that example, compares to the 2024 expression of that. So I believe there's tremendous value in that. And it would be interesting to see that more and more on different cigar media platforms, to maybe start a conversation about, here are these legacy blends, these legacy brands that are definitely well worth revisiting.
Yeah, and we had talked too about, doing the new release list, but also maybe other lists too that aren't just for new releases, but just an ongoing list of these cigars that have been around for a long time.
I think it's a separate list. I totally agree with that. I mean, look, again, this is the, you don't need to smoke what's new. You need to smoke what's new to you. Inherently, most of the lists are going to be what came out this year. And here's the top 20. And I guess it's a little asterisk that needs to be on there. This is the top 20 of what came out this year. That said, I think, and Thor and I talked about this, and, it's probably a separate list, and it's probably out, summer smoking list of whatever. And here's what we're smoking now. Here's our top 10, top 15, whatever it is, right now that are very smokable. And the advantage of that is that you can pick out cigars that are 2-3 years old, that are still on the shelf. They're still great cigars. I don't know why every calendar year we have to leave behind all the other great cigars that came out the year before. Because honestly, sometimes, whoever was the top 20 3 years ago would still be a top 20 for me. I mean, still is in my humidor, still in my cycle. So I think that's a very good point. I think our list probably needs some sort of a clarification that these are the top 20 cigars that came out this year for us. This is how they rated. Sometimes you can sneak that in by it's a different size of a great blend you liked. But that's a very different list, and it's a very, very fair conversation, because we can all walk into a humidor and point somebody to a cigar that's been sitting on the shelf. You brought up Don Carlos. Don Carlos is probably one of the greatest Fuente blends at a great price point that is always right there in the wheelhouse. And I can think of probably 10 that are solid cigars in that humidor. They've been there forever. They're not going to be on a top 20 list because they came out years and years ago, but they're still great cigars. So it's probably our responsible media to help manufacturers not have to keep churning out new cigars as opposed to helping them sell cigars. Because honestly, if it's a great cigar, why would I care if there's a new one that came out in that particular category? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, why do we, if we all made our list of top 7 cigars, who's not going to have Padron 64 or 26 on that list? And that cigar came out ages ago. So, I mean, there are cigars worthy of always being in that conversation, regardless of whether they came out that year or had a line extension.
Amen. Fred, Thor, it's been a tremendous pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. All the very best for both of you with Cigar Press, and to everybody listening, watching. If you hadn't had an opportunity yet, jump on Cigar Press, check out their online, check out the magazine that's coming. And again, it's been a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Another one in the books. Ladies, gents, we'll see you next week. Same time, same station here at the Light 'em Up Lounge. Until then, be safe, be well, light 'em up, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Reinhardt.
Thanks, everybody.
Cigar Press.
Thanks.
Bye, Reinhardt.
Thank you, gentlemen. Fred, I'll see you tomorrow.